All right, so we're deep diving into Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Beyond just a book summary, though, we're looking at your notes, some critical reviews we found, even some modern psychology articles to see if
Yeah.
it holds up, you know?
Yeah. It's amazing how relevant Carnegie's insights are, even almost a century later.
Yeah.
He taps into these fundamental human needs, like the desire to feel valued, respected, understood. It's really the foundation of any strong relationship,
Yeah.
whether it's personal or professional.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But it's easy to just say, be nice, be respectful. Carnegie goes deeper, though, right? He gives you these concrete strategies. Like,
hmm
he starts the book off with, don't criticize, condemn, or complain. And personally, I struggle with this one. Like, when someone messes up, my first instinct is to, like, point out the error.
Yeah, that's natural. But Carnegie argues that direct criticism often backfires. It triggers defensiveness, makes people less receptive to feedback, even if it's valid.
So how do you address problems without criticizing them?
Well, Carnegie suggests focusing on understanding, like why did the person make the mistake? Were there external factors? Once you understand the context, you can offer guidance instead of blame.
Right. There's that example to book about the manager and the employee. Who keeps messing up? And
Yeah.
instead of like yelling at them, the manager walks the employee through the process, pointing out areas for improvement. It not only solves the problem, it strengthens their relationship.
Exactly. It shifts the focus from blame to collaboration, which leads perfectly into Carnegie's next principle: give honest and sincere appreciation.
Okay, so that seems pretty obvious,
hmm
but I think we often underestimate the power of genuine appreciation. It's not just saying good job, it's about recognizing someone's efforts, their unique contributions.
Right. And it has to be authentic. Carnegie was very adamant about that. Flattery, on the other hand, is manipulative and can actually damage
Oh
relationships.
yeah, I've been on the receiving end of insincere flattery before. And it's so cringy, it just feels fake and it makes you question the person's motives.
Exactly. Think about a time when someone genuinely acknowledged your efforts. How did it make you feel?
Motivated,
hmm
valued, like I wanted to go above and beyond, which I guess is a great segue to Carnegie's principle of arousing in the other person an eager want.
Right. This principle is all about understanding motivation. What does the other person want? How can you align your request with their desires?
So instead of trying to force my agenda, I need to consider their perspective, their goals.
Precisely. Carnegie uses the example of selling a product. A skilled salesperson doesn't just list features. They highlight the benefits for the customer, how the product solves their specific problems.
That's about creating a win-win situation where both parties feel satisfied.
Exactly. And this connects to a fascinating concept in psychology called the reciprocity principle. When we feel like someone is genuinely trying to meet our needs, we're more inclined to reciprocate.
So by understanding someone's motivations and aligning our requests with their desires, we're not just being manipulative, we're actually tapping into a natural human tendency to cooperate.
Precisely. It's about creating a positive cycle of mutual benefit.
Oh, that's brilliant. Okay, so we've tackled the don'ts of criticism, the don'ts of appreciation and understanding motivation. What other gems does Carnegie have for us in this section on handling people?
Well, this is where he gets into some more nuanced strategies for influencing others. And it all starts with a simple, but often overlooked skill: listening.
Oh, listening. I have to admit, I'm not always the best listener. I tend to get distracted or jump in with my own thoughts. What does Carnegie say about the art of truly listening?
Well, he says that being a good listener is one of the highest compliments you can pay someone. It shows that you value their thoughts and opinions, that you're genuinely interested in what they have to say.
Yeah, that makes sense. When someone really listens to me, without interrupting or trying to steer the conversation, it makes me feel heard and understood. It deepens the connection.
Absolutely. Active listening goes beyond just hearing the words. It's about paying attention to nonverbal cues, asking clarifying questions, and reflecting back what you've heard to ensure understanding.
It's like you're creating a safe space for the other person to share their thoughts and feelings openly.
Precisely. And that sense of safety and trust is essential for building strong, lasting relationships. Now, think about a time when you felt truly listened to. What impact did it have on you?
Honestly, it made me feel respected and valued. It made me want to open up more, to share more of myself.
And that's the magic of genuine listening. It creates a virtuous cycle of connection and trust.
Okay, so we've established that listening is crucial. What other tips does Carnegie offer for making people like you? I'm ready for some actionable advice.
Well, here's one that's surprisingly simple, but often overlooked: smiling. Carnegie talks about the power of a smile. as a universal gesture of warmth and friendliness.
I know a smile can completely change the energy of an interaction. It's like an instant icebreaker. It disarms people
Yeah.
and makes them feel more connected.
Exactly. It signals approachability and openness, and it triggers a positive emotional response in the other person, making them more likely to reciprocate with warmth and friendliness.
It's like a chain reaction of positivity. Okay, so smiling is key. What else? I'm feeling more charming already.
All right, here's a classic piece of advice that's easier said than done: remembering names. Carnegie stresses that a person's name is the sweetest sound to them. It shows that you see them as an individual, that you value their uniqueness.
Ugh, I'm terrible with names. I meet someone, have a great conversation, and then completely blank on their name 5 minutes later.
Yeah.
But I know how good it feels when someone remembers my name. It makes me feel special, like I matter.
Yeah, it's a simple but powerful way to show respect and build rapport.
I have this vivid memory from a networking event a few years ago. I was chatting with this group of people, and one guy who I'd only briefly met once before remembered my name. And it totally changed my perception of him. I immediately felt more connected and comfortable.
That's a perfect illustration of how a small gesture can have a significant impact. It shows you're paying attention, that you care.
So how do we get better at remembering names then? Any tips from Carnegie?
He suggests a few techniques. One is repetition. When you first meet someone, repeat their name a few times in the conversation. "It's nice to meet you, Sarah. So, Sarah, tell me."
Okay, that makes sense. It helps solidify the name in your memory.
Another tip is to associate the name with a visual image. For example, if you meet someone named Mark who has a distinctive beard, you might picture a mark on his beard to help you remember.
Ooh, that's clever. I'm going to try that. So we've covered listening, smiling, and remembering names. What other insights does Carnegie offer for making people genuinely like you?
Well, he emphasizes the importance of finding common ground. People are naturally drawn to those who share their interests, values, and experiences.
Like you're speaking the same language,
Yeah.
even if you come from different backgrounds.
Exactly. And finding common ground doesn't have to be complicated. It could be a shared hobby, a favorite book, or even just a mutual appreciation for a certain type of music.
It's about building bridges instead of walls. And once you've established that connection, how do you nurture it?
Carnegie suggests making the other person feel important and doing it sincerely. This goes back to our earlier discussion about genuine appreciation. It's about acknowledging someone's contributions, expressing gratitude, and making them feel valued for who they are.
It's about recognizing their strengths and celebrating their successes, big or small.
Exactly. And this doesn't require grand gestures. It's often the small, everyday interactions that have the most significant impact. A handwritten thank you note, a thoughtful compliment, or simply taking the time to truly listen can make someone feel truly seen and appreciated.
This is resonating with me. I'm realizing that making people like you isn't about using tricks or being manipulative. It's about cultivating genuine connection and showing genuine interest in others.
Precisely. It's about approaching relationships with a spirit of generosity and kindness, and those are qualities that never go out of style.
Okay, so we've covered handling people with respect, understanding their motivations, and cultivating genuine connections. I'm ready to move on to part 3, where Carnegie dives into the art of persuasion. How do we win people over to our way of thinking without resorting to manipulation or coercion? Let's find out.
Yeah, this is where things get interesting. It's the art of persuasion, but in a way that's ethical, you know, and respects the other person's viewpoint.
So how do we do that? Where do we even begin?
Well, Carnegie kicks off with a powerful principle that might surprise you. The only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it.
That's interesting. I can be pretty stubborn, and I often feel the need to prove my point, But I have to admit, I rarely feel good after an argument, even if I win.
Exactly. Arguments often escalate into these emotional battles where no one is truly listening. They can damage relationships and create resentment.
So instead of trying to win an argument then, what does Carnegie suggest?
He advocates for understanding. Instead of trying to prove the other person wrong, try to see things from their perspective. Ask clarifying questions. Listen actively. You might even find some common ground you didn't expect.
So it's about shifting the goal from winning to understanding. But what if you fundamentally disagree with someone? How do you navigate that?
Well, that's where Carnegie's next principle comes in. Show respect for the other person's opinions. Never say you're wrong.
Okay, I can see how that would be counterproductive. Telling someone they're wrong just puts them on the defensive.
Exactly. It shuts down the conversation and makes it much harder to find common ground. Even if you think someone is completely off base, Acknowledge their perspective. Say something like, I understand why you see it that way.
Right. So it's about validating their feelings, even if you don't agree with their conclusions.
Precisely. It shows respect and keeps the lines of communication open.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about when we're the ones who mess up? Does Carnegie have any advice for handling our own mistakes?
He does. He says, if you are wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically.
That sounds counterintuitive. My instinct is to downplay my mistakes or make excuses.
It's a natural reaction. But Carnegie argues that owning up to your mistakes can actually build trust and respect. It shows humility and a willingness to learn.
Yeah, it also disarms the other person. It's hard to stay angry at someone who readily admits their faults.
Exactly. And it sets a more positive tone for the conversation. It shows you're willing to take responsibility, which makes it more likely that the other person will be open to your perspective.
This is really making me rethink how I approach conflict and difficult conversations. So we've talked about avoiding arguments, respecting opinions, and admitting our mistakes. What's next on Carnegie's persuasion playbook?
He emphasizes the importance of starting on a friendly note. Begin in a friendly way, he says. It sounds simple, but how often do we launch into these difficult conversations when we're already feeling stressed or annoyed?
Oh, all the time. I know I've definitely been guilty of that. Starting conversations on the wrong foot. It's like setting yourself up for failure.
Exactly. Even a simple smile or a genuine compliment can diffuse tension and create a more receptive atmosphere.
Right, it's like extending an olive branch, showing that you're approaching the conversation with goodwill.
Precisely. Now, are you ready for some specific tactics for winning people over to your way of thinking?
Bring it on. I'm all ears.
Okay, here's a clever one. Get the other person saying yes, yes immediately.
Ooh, I like the sound of that. How do we do it?
It's about finding points of agreement early on in the conversation. Start with things you both can agree on, even if they're small. This builds momentum and creates a sense of collaboration.
Okay, so it's like you're gently guiding them towards your point of view by establishing that common ground.
Exactly. And here's another tactic that might surprise you. Let the other person do a great deal of the talking.
Wait, really? I would think that to be persuasive, you would want to do most of the talking.
It seems counterintuitive, right? But Carnegie argues that when you let the other person talk, a few key things happen. First, it makes them feel heard and respected. Second, it gives you valuable insight into their thoughts, their motivations, and potential objections.
So it's not about dominating the conversation. It's about gathering information
Oh,
and building understanding.
Precisely. And here's a powerful technique that plays on a fundamental human desire. Let the other person feel that the idea is theirs. People are much more likely to support an idea if they believe they came up with it themselves.
Oh, so it's about subtly guiding them towards a conclusion that they feel ownership over. It's influence, not control.
Exactly. And finally, Carnegie brings us back to a theme we've touched on before. Try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view.
Empathy is key. It's about putting yourself in their shoes, understanding their perspective, even if you don't agree with it.
Right. And that's a skill that takes practice and a willingness to step outside of your own ego.
This whole section on persuasion has been eye-opening. I'm starting to see how these principles can be applied in so many areas of life, from negotiating a raise to resolving conflicts with loved ones.
That's the beauty of Carnegie's work. It's timeless and universally applicable. And remember, true persuasion isn't about manipulation or coercion. It's about building authentic connections, understanding others, and finding common ground.
Well said.
Yeah.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful. I feel like I have a whole new toolkit for navigating relationships and communication.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, the key is to put these principles into practice. The more you use them, the more natural they'll become.
Absolutely. This is definitely a book I'll be revisiting again and again. Thanks for guiding me through this deep dive. It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure was all mine. Happy influencing.
Okay, so part 3, winning people to your way of thinking. This is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
We're talking about persuasion, but in an ethical way that respects the other person's viewpoint.
Exactly. It's not about tricks or manipulation. Carnegie emphasizes building consensus, finding common ground, and ultimately persuading people by appealing to their best interests.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, he starts off with a pretty powerful principle. That might surprise you. He says, the only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it.
Interesting. I can be pretty stubborn sometimes, and I do feel the need to prove my point. But honestly, I rarely feel good after an argument, even if I win.
Right. Arguments often just escalate into these emotional battles. where no one's really listening, and they can damage relationships and create resentment.
So instead of trying to win an argument then, what does Carnegie suggest?
He advocates for understanding. Instead of trying to prove the other person wrong, try to see things from their perspective. Ask clarifying questions. Listen actively. You might even find some common ground that you didn't expect.
So it's about shifting the goal from winning to understanding. But what if you just fundamentally disagree with someone? How do you navigate that?
Well, that's where his next principle comes in. Show respect for the other person's opinions. Never say, you're wrong.
Yeah, I see how that would be counterproductive.
Right.
Telling someone they're wrong
Yeah.
just puts them on the defensive immediately.
Exactly. It shuts down the conversation. And it makes it way harder to find common ground. Even if you think someone is completely off base, you know, acknowledge their perspective. Say something like, I understand why you see it that way.
So it's about validating their feelings,
Yeah,
even if you don't agree with their conclusions.
precisely. It shows respect.
Yeah.
And it keeps those lines of communication open.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about when WE are the ones who mess up? Does Carnegie have any advice for handling our own mistakes?
He does. He has a great principle for that. If you're wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically.
That sounds kind of counterintuitive, though. My instinct is to downplay my mistakes or,
Yeah.
make excuses.
It's a natural reaction. But Carnegie says that owning up to your mistakes can actually build trust and respect. It shows humility. And it shows a willingness to learn.
Yeah, it also disarms the other person. It's hard to stay angry at someone who readily admits their faults.
Exactly. And it just sets a more positive tone for the conversation. You're showing that you're willing to take responsibility, which makes it more likely that they'll be open to your perspective.
This is making me rethink how I approach these conflict situations and difficult conversations. So we've talked about avoiding arguments, respecting opinions, admitting our mistakes. What else is in Carnegie's playbook for persuasion?
Well, he emphasizes the importance of starting on a friendly note. He says, begin in a friendly way. Now, it sounds simple enough, but how often do we launch into these tough conversations when we're already feeling stressed or annoyed?
Oh, all the time. I'm definitely guilty of that.
Yeah.
Starting a conversation on the wrong foot. It's like you're setting yourself up for failure.
Right. Even just a simple smile or a genuine compliment can just diffuse that tension and create a more receptive atmosphere.
Like you're extending an olive branch,
Yeah.
showing them that you're approaching this with good intentions.
Exactly. So are you ready for some specific tactics for winning people over to your way of thinking?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay, here's a good one. Get the other person saying yes, yes immediately.
Ooh, I like that. How do we do that?
It's about finding those points of agreement early on. Start with things you can both agree on, even if they're small. This builds momentum and creates a sense of collaboration.
So you're kind of gently guiding them towards your point of view by establishing that common ground.
Exactly. Now here's another one that might surprise you. Let the other person do a great deal of the talking.
Really? I would think that to be persuasive. You'd want to do most of the talking.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive. But Carnegie argues that when you let the other person talk, a few things happen. First, it makes them feel heard and respected. And second, it gives you valuable insight into their thoughts and their motivations and any potential objections they might have.
So it's not about dominating the conversation. It's more about gathering information and building understanding.
Precisely. And here's another powerful technique. Let the other person feel the idea is theirs. People are much more likely to support an idea if they believe they came up with it themselves.
It's about subtly guiding them towards a conclusion that they feel ownership of. It's influence, not control.
Exactly. And finally, Carnegie brings us back to a theme we've touched on. Try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view.
Empathy is key. Putting yourself in their shoes, trying to understand their perspective, even if you don't agree with it.
Right. And that's a skill that takes practice and a willingness to step outside of your own ego.
This whole section on persuasion has been really eye-opening. I'm starting to see how these principles could be applied to so many areas of life, from negotiating a raise to resolving conflicts with family members. It's pretty amazing.
That's the beauty of Carnegie's work. It's timeless and universally applicable. And remember, true persuasion isn't about manipulation or coercion. It's about building those authentic connections, understanding other people, and finding that common ground.
Well said. This has been a really insightful deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools now for navigating relationships and communication.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, the key is to put these principles into practice. The more you use them, the more natural they'll become.
Absolutely. This is definitely a book I'll be coming back to. Thanks for guiding me through this deep dive. It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure was all mine. Happy influencing, I know.